I do.
Okay, this is Mama with Jeremy and Ronnie and Clay. And Mama is 60 years old. Pretty old, isn't it? And we're making a videotape for these three kids. Yay!
Oh, yeah.
And they like to be together, don't you? Do you like Jeremy? Do you love Jeremy? You love
I
Mama?
watch this every day.
You wish for Jeremy every day?
I love you too.
Okay.
We also love Mama, don't we?
Oh, yes.
We love Mama, don't we? Oh, yeah.
What do you like to do with Mama? What do you like to do?
Play.
Play. Like to come to Mama and Granddad's house? Yeah, we like it when Jeremy comes, don't we? And we're all alone with no mommies and daddies. Yeah, do you like that, Clay? We play in the bed in the mornings, don't we? Yeah.
And we bounce on the bed.
Oh, don't tell Mommy. And we hide in the sheets.
And Jeremy goes diving off the bed.
And what's Jeremy's nickname? What do we call him? Snizzle Frizzle? What do we call this one over here?
Giggle Google.
Giggle Google. Cause he,
Oh, yeah.
you're not Giggle Google?
Not
Sugarfoot? We call this one Sugarfoot, don't we? Yeah. We call him Snizzle Frizzle because he liked jumbled up names when he was a little boy. Silly names. Silly words. And this one giggles constantly. Don't you? Do you like to go to Dallas?
I like to go all the way up.
No, not today. We're not going today. Okay. Hi, Clay.
Jeremy,
Hello.
Hello, Jeremy. Okay, this is Jeremy, the oldest grandson. Jeremy's 12, going on 25.
I hope.
We've known Jeremy for 12 years now, so we can see what Jeremy's kind of the personality that he has developed. I think the personality that you have now is the personality you're going to have for the rest of your life.
I hope so.
Jeremy's real even-keeled. He's not temperamental at all. Of course, he's going through this high school, this getting ready to go through this major adolescent change. But he's a pretty even-keeled, easygoing personality. Pretty much a happy kid and a really talented kid. Plays the piano excellently.
Thank you.
And plays the trumpet, loves music. And I can already tell music's probably going to be his number one love in his life. So far.
Yes.
And he's a good student, studies hard, learns quickly, makes good grades. He has a real sensitivity for other people already. He's kind and gentle and kind to other people, and I've noticed that a lot and like it. And I told you I like that a lot.
You did? Okay.
I have told you that before.
Oh, okay.
And we're really, really proud of Jeremy. I think he's going to be a really fine young man and do really great things one of these days. We're expecting a lot from our grandkids, all three of them. And I think that's good to expect your children and grandchildren to turn into really responsible, caring, loving human beings. That's what we want for you.
Me too.
Okay.
Bread's probably in the pantry.
I kind of messed up on that.
Necklace.
That's Jeremy's.
Tell us about your childhood.
Okay, well, 2nd, 1940. My family moved from North Carolina to El Paso when my mother was expecting me. I was on the way when they came. The Deal family had come to Texas once before, to Laredo, in the years immediately following the Depression, when people didn't have jobs and they were looking for work. And in Laredo, my grandfather and my dad and his brothers opened up a bottling company. Oh, let's see, which one was it? I can't remember. It was RC Cola, I think, the RC Cola bottling company in Laredo. And then they moved back to North Carolina. And when they moved back to North Carolina, that was the time when Daddy met Mama, and they got married. And Jerry and Bill were born in North Carolina in their home. Mama tells the story about how Grandmother Deal came and helped her deliver Jerry and Bill. So Grandmother Deal literally, and the doctor was there, but Grandmother Deal is the one that brought the baby out, brought Jerry out and delivered Jerry. And then Bill was born there in that house too. And they lived in North Carolina in a duplex. And when they came to El Paso, the family came out to El Paso because, again, the job market was really tight. Times were really tough then. And when they came to El Paso, my grandfather Deal bought a service station. He had been running a service station in North Carolina, and they sort of shifted between bottling companies, doing work with the bottling companies, and in North Carolina it was the Coca-Cola and the Cheer Wine was combined together with the bottling company. So when they came to El Paso, I was on the way, and they moved into a duplex in El Paso. And Mama told me that when she was pregnant with me, and after I was born, but when she was pregnant with me, the times were so tough that she would go to the pantry and open the pantry. The kids would be hungry, and she would go to the pantry and open the pantry, and there would be beans and maybe enough to make some cornbread. And that's what she would feed the kids. She would feed the kids first because the times were so tough, and they were just barely scraping by. So she was going to a female OBGYN, which is real. No, she was a family doctor. She wasn't an OBGYN. She was just a general practitioner. And it's unusual to even have a female doctor at that time. Very unusual. And they couldn't afford the hospital bill. They couldn't afford the doctor bill. So the doctor told them that they could pay it out any way they wanted to, and I don't think she even made them pay the whole bill for delivering me, but they couldn't afford to go to the hospital. So she said, well, there's a clinica in the Mexican part of town where you can go and be in a ward with other women, and it was about it. So I was born in a clinic about 6 blocks from the Mexican border, almost in Juarez. For the rest of my life, my brothers teased me and said, that I was, quote, what they called at that time, a little Mexican baby, that they had mixed me up at the hospital. And I didn't really belong to the family. They always liked to tease me about that. But that's where I was born, and they used to keep women in the hospital for about a week or 10 days at that time. My mother had to come home early because they didn't have enough money, but there were 6 women, she said, in the ward that all had their babies at the same time. Then, when we went home, we lived in that duplex for a while. I don't remember it. I have pictures of it, and I remember some of the toys that we had, like the kitty car toys and things like that. We then moved to Pershing Drive, and that's the house that I grew up in that I remember the most, on Pershing Drive. used to think, I grew up thinking that there was a great deal of distance between my house and my grandmother's house and where my dad worked in our little neighborhood. It was like it was called 5 Points, and it was like Lakewood, where 5 streets all come together. And it was about the same distance from 5 Points, our neighborhood, to the downtown area as it is from Lakewood to downtown Dallas. It's about 2 miles, I guess, 2 or 3 miles. And at the shopping center, that was called 5 Points, and that's where we had the dime store and the movie and all that kind of thing. And then there was 1 block of houses, and my dentist's office. He officed in a house. At the back of his house, he had his office. In the next block is where my grandmother lived. In the next block was a house that belonged to in the family, and it went back and forth from one aunt and uncle to another aunt and uncle. There were 2 or 3 aunts and uncles that kept moving back and forth from North Carolina to El Paso. My daddy's family, there were 4 boys and 4 girls, and they all basically lived in the same location, except periodically some would move back to North Carolina. And then in the next block, so it was my grandmother, my aunt and uncle's house, and then there was a side street, and about a block up the side street was another aunt and uncle. And then 1 more block, and at the end of that block is where we lived. Then on the same block that where my grandmother lived, but 1 street over, was the family business. And that was my father and grandfather had a service station and a garage and a car lot. And at first they sold used cars, but then very quickly, because not everybody had a car in those days, lots of people were buying cars like people are buying computers right now. It's kind of the same kind of thing, that very rapidly people were beginning to buy cars. So very quickly they went from the used car to the new car business, and it grew and grew and grew. So my community was very close, and our school was just on a side street about 2 or 3 blocks away, so you could walk, and we did. We walked everywhere. I lived across the street from where I lived. Across the street there were houses up on a hill, because in El Paso we lived at the bottom of the Franklin Mountains, so there was a lot of hilly streets. So the houses across the street were kind of up on a hill, and then behind them were a railroad track. So every day, the big thing for kids was to always meet the trains. We had vacant lots next to our house, and that's where we played, and we built forts, and the girls built rooms. We had rocks, big rocks, that we would make kitchens and a bedroom. We'd play the house and make our house, and play on the dirt, in the dirt. And the boys would be at the back of the empty lot with their fort, which they dug out. They would literally get shovels and dig it out and put branches and things. And the girls, out of bounds for all the girls. No girls could go in the boys' fort. But the trains would come, and they would know that we were going to be playing on the lots. And so we would all get together every time we heard a train, and they would toot their horn at us, and we would wave hello at all the trains that passed. We had a lot of really neat games we played. I played a lot of boy games. I played cars and trucks and cowboys and Indians. Had lots of kids in our neighborhood, including Jimmy Monroe, who lived at the opposite end of the block, who was my boyfriend. And he was a very intellectual looking little boy, very smart, very calm little boy, kind of like a little like Jeremy. Reminds me a little bit of the personality that Jimmy Monroe wore glasses, which nobody wore. No little kids wore glasses in that day. It was very unusual. And he only had a mommy. Jimmy Monroe only had a mommy because his dad had died when he was a little bitty boy. He didn't even remember his daddy. And he had an older brother that was quite a bit older than he was. Probably, well, I say quite a bit. Probably 7 or 8 years older than he was. Who, his mom was a nurse, so his mother would go to work during the day, and his brother, when they were out of school, his brother was there taking care of him. They never had babysitters because they couldn't afford babysitters. So he was one of my big playmates. My other big playmate, when she lived there, was my cousin Joanne, who lived on that side street that I said. There was a side street with an aunt and uncle up there. The problem with them was that her daddy was an alcoholic, and so he would move back and forth from El Paso to North Carolina a lot, and would lose his job and get in trouble in North Carolina and move back to El Paso. My father was always going and trying to find him when he would be out on a drinking spree, and that made a very, very big impression on me as a child. A very big impression. My daddy told the story about how when he was a young man, he and his older brother, he had an older brother named Tom, and it was Tom and then Vincent and then Don, and I mean Tom and Lawrence and Don and Vincent. Vincent was the baby. So this uncle was named Don, and Daddy said that he remembered one time that he and Tom and Don all went out as teenagers and got drunk, and he was walking home, and he was walking up the steps to his house and just upchucked everything, just got really, really sick. And from that day on, he never took another drink. My daddy never took another drink. He just did not drink at all. And so when he would get calls in the middle of the night from my aunt or from somebody that knew the family, and my uncle would be drinking too much, and he would be too drunk to drive home, they would call my daddy, and my daddy would go and get him, or he would go and find him. And he would be out looking up and down the streets in these bars trying to find his brother. And then he'd bring him home, and I would hear this little whispering going on between my mother and Dad about, what my dad had done, and had found his brother and how bad he was. And that really made a very big impression on me. I learned early, very early, that alcohol was a very bad thing and could be very damaging to a family. So his daughter, Joanne, was my very best friend, and Joanne and I did lots and lots together and played together a whole lot when we were growing up, when she lived there. And I was going to tell you a little bit about the Deal family history, because I've been doing some reading about that lately, and my aunt had tried to do genealogical studies, and so has a cousin of mine named Ann, another cousin named Ann Harrell, and her mother was my father's sister. She's been doing a little history. But they put me in touch with a man who has done a Deal history, and we traced the Deal family side back all the way to the first immigrant that came over from Germany. There was a lot of debate. I remember my family not wanting to admit that our family came from Germany, and that was when I was real little. It was right after World War II. And now that I understand the history, I understand why they wanted to deny that, because the war was, of course, against the Germans, and Hitler was a German, and you didn't want to have any connection with that. But we do know now that the Deal side of the family did come from this little community in Germany where the people were really pretty poor. They were not landowners. And they came over to America. Apparently he came over with, I believe it was 5 brothers all came together. And we know the name of the ship was the Glasgow. His name is written on the listing. They came to Philadelphia and lived in that area for a few years before they migrated to the North Carolina area. And there was William and then Jacob. And then Jacob had a son named William. The first William was Wilhelm. And we think the name was spelled D-I-E-H-L, which was later shortened to D-I-E-L, which was later changed to D-E-A-L. And anyway, I have pictures going back to my great-great-grandparents. We have those photographs, and they're listed in this genealogy. And I have a piece of a quilt from my great-grandmother that I'm really proud to have. So that's, we know quite a bit about the Deal family. I don't know anything about my mother's family. My mother grew up in a little community called Pooby's Grove, North Carolina. My father's family had owned land. Apparently my great-great-grandparents had owned land, and they inherited land. And so that side of the family had quite a bit more money than my mother's side of the family. My mother's side of the family was really poor. Granny Pooby tells a story about how she was a young widow. She was married when she was about 15 or 16 years old. And her husband, her first husband, got some sort of tuberculosis or one of those diseases that they had no medicine for because they didn't have antibiotics in those days. You couldn't take medicine and get well. And so her husband had this infection and died very suddenly. And I remember her telling me, like, looking in her eyes, you know, you could still see the pain, like she had been deeply in love with this man. And he died. So one of her uncles knew that there was a man in Pooby's Grove who had lost his wife in childbirth. And this man had already had 2 sons. And that was my grandfather, Pooby, who the man became my grandfather, Pooby. He had 2 children. One was just a little bitty baby. And her uncle said, you know, I can put you on the train and he'll meet you at the train station and you can become his wife. And so that's what she did. She got on the train and she went to Granite Falls. He met her at the train station. They got married and she instantly became the mother, and she was like 16 or 17. She instantly became the mother of like a 3-year-old and then this little baby. But the parents of the first wife, my granddaddy's first wife, wanted to keep the children. They didn't want him to have the children because they blamed him for the wife's death. And so they kept the children. And Granny Pooby and my granddaddy Pooby would get the boys only once in a while. They didn't really live with them all the time. They would come and live with them part of the time. And I don't know whether it was like, you know, during the summer or what, but that they didn't live with them all the time. Then Granny Pooby and Granddaddy had 3 children, my Aunt Ruth, my mama, and Nancy. And they had Nancy when my mother was 18, so she was a very late baby. And I don't know where that side of the family came from. I have an idea that there's English-Irish history in their background, but I'm not real sure about that. they lived in a community called Pooby's Grove. Their last name was Pooby. And they went to a church called Pooby's Grove Baptist Church. My Aunt Ruth was the pianist at the church, and she really played the piano all the time. And I love to go to North Carolina because especially I love to go when nobody was at Aunt Ruth's house, because she would let me bang on that piano as loud as I wanted to, which is something that my mother didn't allow. So I would, and she had all this old music, sheet music, and all these old songs. And so I could pull out that sheet music and play it and just sing and have a big time. That's what I did when I went to Aunt Ruth's house. Take a break.
Tell us about your brothers and sister.
Well, I had two big brothers and a little sister. Jerry was the first child, and Bill. Jerry was 3 years older than me. Bill was 2 years older than me, and Jenny was 5 years younger than me. And Jerry and Bill were little toots. Bill was the chunky, chubby child. Jerry was the tall, skinny child. And they were all boy, they were just constantly fighting with each other and irritating each other all of their lives, and in fact they still do that. And then Jeannie, of course, I was the baby for 5 years, and then Jeannie came along. When we were little, we could go anywhere we wanted to go, basically. I mean, I just never remember adults having to go along with us. We walked everywhere we wanted to go. If I wanted to go over to see my daddy at work, I just told whoever was at the house that I was going, and I went walking, and I had to cut through vacant lots and go, but I went, and to see him, and we all did that. We got on the bus and went downtown and went shopping if we wanted to do that when we were in elementary school. And I was a tag-along with the boys constantly. If they were playing baseball, I was playing baseball, and if they were in the dirt playing cars and trucks, I was in the dirt. If we used to play cowboys and Indians, and the people across the street, it was a great place because they had porches that could be their fortresses. And so, they would play like they were, either they'd be the cowboys and those were the mountains, and we'd be on the opposite side of the street and playing with them. I remember one time, we walked to the movie and went to the movie every Saturday. I could guess kids all over America did the same thing. Saturday was the movie day. And in the mornings, of course, they would have the serials and with Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and The Lone Ranger and all that. And you would see maybe 4 or 5 serials in a row with all these different cowboys, usually, in them. And I think it cost you, I think we took a quarter, and for a quarter you could get into the movie and buy a drink and a candy bar. And maybe even have a little bit left to go to the dime store, which was across the street, and get you some penny candy or something afterwards. So that's what we did every Saturday. And one time, my cousin Joanne had two little brothers, younger than us. So we would take them too, and so all of us, there'd be 4 of us and 3 of them. We'd all go to the movies. And one time we went to the movies, and the movie was over, and we all came home and started down the street and walking home. We had to cross a real busy street to get home. We came walking down the street, walking home, and my mother and my Aunt Myrtle, Joanne's mother, had been out shopping or doing something, and they were in the car, and they saw us, and they stopped us, and they said, "Where's Jeannie?" I looked around, and there was no Jeannie. Boy, were we in trouble. We were in trouble big time. They got us in that car, and they turned around that car, and they went to the movie theater. They were frantic. And we were like, oh my gosh. And find her. She was sitting right where we left her. She didn't even know we were gone. She was just sitting there, you know, watching the movie. All by herself. She was there. Oh, I remember my brothers getting in trouble for doing things all the time. And I remember one time we were on a trip, and when we got in a car to go on a trip, it was a hoot because there were 4 kids and a mom and a daddy. No air conditioning in the car, except my daddy had rigged up one of these portable air conditioner things that he stuck it in the window, you know. You had to roll the window up so you couldn't let the window down any at all, and it blew in. It was like a cooler. You put water in the bottom of it, and it blew this sort of cool air into the car. So it was hot and muggy inside the car, and you had 4 kids that were, 2 boys that were always pestering each other, teaching each other, and you know, I'd get in the back seat between the boys, and the boys would be fighting, you know, between me, you know, and I'd slap one. The other one would be pestering or saying something smarty to the other one. Before you know it, somebody would be crying, and my mother would be in the front seat with either Jeannie or me. Usually rode in the front seat. We'd take turns, and the boys in the back seat. Well, one time we were on a trip, and the boys were just going on and on, especially Bill, and he was just, you know, smart mouthing. Every time my daddy would say, you know, I want you boys back there to behave. You boys stop that. You boys behave. Bill, do you hear me? And so one time we were out in the desert. I think we were going to Arizona or somewhere. It was really long ways between places to stop. You had to carry your water, and you had to carry stuff for the car in case it broke down, because there weren't service stations. So one time Bill just wouldn't stop. He was picking on me and picking on Jerry, and just, you know, he just wouldn't behave. So, man, the brakes went on that car. Stop that car. Bill, get out. Daddy, I don't want to get out. Bill, I said get out. Daddy, I don't want to get out. He said, Bill, get out of the car. So Bill got out of the car, shut the door. My daddy took off. We were all in the car. We were at the bottom of the hill. We all took off. Got to the top of the hill. He backed down that hill. Bill was standing there just crying, just bawling, just crying. He thought he had taken off, you know. He said, are you ready to behave yourself now? Yes, sir. All right, you get in this car and you behave. So that's how he handled problems.
Tell us about your mom and dad.
Well, my mother was a really beautiful woman. I remember just everybody thought she was so pretty all the time. She dressed up. Women didn't wear pants in those days. They wore dresses everywhere. So she was all, I mean, every day she was dressed in dress and heels and hose, and a really pretty woman. She had a really hot temper. She was a very big disciplinarian. My dad had what I thought was an easier going personality. He was very handsome. The women all took after him. But he was a friend. I remember he died when I was 14. He had a heart attack. My grandfather died when I was about 9, and they were putting in a water heater. My dad and my granddad were putting in a water heater, and my granddad just had a heart attack and died. And then when I was 14, my dad had a massive heart attack and died. But I remember at the funeral that people came up, just all kinds of people. And in those days, there wasn't a lot of friendship between Hispanics and Anglos, but my father had a lot of Hispanic friends. And they would come up to us and say, oh, one time I didn't have any money for my family. I couldn't buy any food, and your dad just took money out of his pocket and gave it to me. And lots of people like that tell stories like that about him. So he was the real kind-hearted kind of person. he worked way too hard. He worked 7 days a week. Even on Sunday, he would be at work, working hard. But he and my grandfather both just adored children, and I remember children taking to him, really liking him, a lot, and him playing with kids all the time. Kind of an Uncle Bill kind of personality, I guess. Although Bill's personality was much more like my grandfather's than my dad's. But a person that was kind to other people is the thing that stands out in my mind about my father. The stories about him going and getting my uncle when he was drunk and doing things like that. He was not a church-going man at all. He did not go to church at all. Although he had been raised in the Methodist church and baptized in the Methodist church. But those are the things I guess I remember most about my parents.
Tell us about Dad, Jerry.
Oh, he was the cutest thing I had ever seen. We met in English class. We were in this experimental English class at Hardin Simmons, and the nurses, I was a nursing student, the nurses were kept separate and did not commingle with the other students at Hardin Simmons. We took classes at Hardin Simmons, but separate classes. And so one of the English professors wanted to take a group of nurses and pair them with a group with nurses who had scored high on the English entrance exam. And the normal students who had scored high on the English exams and put them in a class. So we were in freshman English class together. And I would look at him across the room, and he would sort of look at me across the room. And I had a friend in that class who said, "Do you want to meet him? Do you want to go out with him?" And I said, "I certainly wouldn't mind it." And so she just sort of said, "I know somebody that would like a date with you." And she sort of set us up, and her name was Dixie. And she came to our 40th anniversary party that we had. She's the one that sort of got us together. And once we started going out, our first date was to church. Our second date was to church. Our third date was to church. We went to church all the time. We could go. They were real strict, the nursing students, and we could only stay out until, get this, Jeremy, 8:30 during the weekday. And I think it was like 10 o'clock on Friday night and maybe 11 o'clock on Saturday night, and that was as late as we could go. So, but you could go to church, and if church extended over, like on Wednesday night till 9 o'clock, you could go to church, but you had to be right back. So we always went to church on Sunday night and Wednesday nights. And Dad sort of got in good with our dorm mother, and she would let us sneak in late a few times, more than a few times we did that. So that's how we met and how we got together. We had our first date in September. I was 17. I went to college at 17, and Dad was 18. Jerry was 18. And in October, I knew that we were going to get married. By that time, I knew that he was the one that I was going to marry. And he knew that I was the one that he was going to marry. We didn't even talk about it, I think, until maybe December. But we knew that early. We just knew we fit. Our values and the things that we liked and our personalities. He was a kind, gentle man. That's the kind of man I was looking for, was someone who was kind and gentle toward other people. That's what I had seen, and that's what I wanted. Jerry and I didn't date anybody else after we started dating. We just dated each other. And some of the things I liked so much about him were, for one thing, he had a real happy disposition, and he made me laugh a lot. I liked that. He was real involved in student activities on the campus, and that 2-year period of time before we got married, while we were dating, and he had the respect of his fellow classmates, and that made a big impression on me. That his classmates and also the faculty, respected him. It was almost like he had a depth about him or a maturity about him far beyond his years. I remember one of the physical characteristics that I liked about him so much, and yeah, my daughters laugh at this, but were his hands. And I remember looking at his hands and just thinking, these are hands that can do a lot. I didn't know at that time that he was going to be a builder and build the toys and things that he has, or do the woodworking skills that he had. There was something about his hands. I remember I had read about Eleanor Roosevelt, and I think in the White House, she has a picture of hands, or her hands are pictured, because her hands were so busy in her life. She was so busy doing things. And I felt that. I remember feeling that about Jerry, which is a strange thing, but those were the things, that impressed me about him, was the respect that somehow he commanded or was given by his colleagues, by the other students and the organizations that he was in. He was a leader. He was president of several things, and was a leader and an honor student. Well, we got married on May 29th, 1959, and some of the good things I think about marriage, Jerry and I, in the 2 years before we got married, were best friends, but that friendship has continued to grow and develop every year, and I think that being a good friend with your partner is the most important consideration that you need to make when you're marrying somebody, I think. And making sure that the match is a really good fit in terms of your values and your goals in life, what you want, and what you want to leave your children and grandchildren. And I think we've done a pretty good job of doing that. We have a really close marriage. My children have always been supremely important to me. But I think ultimately that one person that you marry, the person that you marry has to be really the most important person in your life, because if that relationship is not good and is hurting, then your children will be hurting. Marriage is hard and difficult, and it hasn't been all chocolate cake with icing on it for us. There've been really hard, difficult times, which I think every marriage has to go through these hard times. But each time you go through something like that and you make it, and you learn something, and you go on and continue your marriage, then you each grow a little bit and you grow together. The other thing that we have done in our marriage that I think, as I've watched our friends, a lot of them maybe haven't done, is that, and maybe this is because we married so young. We were in the 19s when we got married. Jerry was almost 20. Is that we've grown intellectually together. Like, we've been in school so much of our marriage, but instead of just sending Dad to school or helping Dad, working so that Dad could go to school, it's also been important to me to go to school. So when he went to the seminary and took classes, I went to the seminary and took classes for only 1 year because I had Cammie, but still. And I majored in religion, minored in religion, but had enough hours to major in it. And when I went back and got my bachelor's degree, and I always tried to. He was intellectually growing so fast because he was getting multiple graduate degrees, and so I was constantly trying to also learn and grow. And he didn't leave me behind because he would come home and share what he was learning with me. And I can remember a lot of times struggling, especially with religious beliefs, because we came out of such a conservative background. And it was so hard to change some of those beliefs. And after he had worked through several issues and changed and done some research and study and changed his beliefs, then he would say to me, well, maybe it's not like what we've always believed. Maybe it's this other way, and I want to tell you why I think that. So we've always done a lot of intellectual growth together, and I think that's a real key element in our marriage.
Tell us about Granddad Clay, Mama Irene, and Uncle Ronnie.
Okay, they were just a delightful family. Mama Irene was a really attractive, gorgeous woman, but she was also, she had just a vitality and vivaciousness about her that was really unique. She could do so much in the amount of time that she had that was just amazing. And when I think about it now, as I am a grandmother, and I think about all of the things that she did, I just don't know where she had the hours and the time to do everything that she did. She accomplished so much in such a short period of time. She, when she was younger, she was very involved in church work and youth work at church. And I can remember when I first knew her that some of the young women would come up and say, oh, she's so fine, and she is my model, I want to be just like her. A lot of people said that. Granddad Clay was a lot like Jerry, or Jerry is a lot like his dad, was very kind person, kind of quiet, a worker in the background. He did a lot of things in the community and was a leader, but he was a quiet leader. He wasn't the kind of leader that just never would be the kind of leader that would just go in and take things over and do it. But it worked in the background a lot, was on the school board and involved in a lot of the organizations around town, like the Lions Club and things like that, and in church activities. Ronnie was a delightful young man. He was, when I met Jerry, I guess Ronnie was about 10 or 11, when I started dating Jerry. And he played the trumpet. He loved music, and he loved jazz and listened to music constantly. And I can remember him, we would sit in the back seat of the car when we would be going over to Clovis or something, and he and I would be back there, and we would just sing. And he was always happy, just this happy personality that people just dearly loved him. And when he was in high school, he was really a leader and a popular kid and a handsome young man. Extremely involved in church work. Church activities were extremely important to Ronnie, and that was probably his number one love, I guess, was doing things with youth at church. And he came to college. We were in Fort Worth. No, we were in Dallas at Boner Children's Home. We had Cammie, who was about 2, and Ronnie came to college in Arlington. And that's where he was in college. He was on his way home one time at Christmas time, and there was a terrible rainstorm, and he had a car accident, and that's when he died. So it was a big loss to not just the family, but the whole community. Just really mourned the loss of this really bright kid that they expected so much from him, because he was really a gifted young man that just had this outgoing, warm personality. He had grown up in the hardware store, and he never met anybody that he didn't know. I mean, he was just, a friend to everybody. So it was a real loss when he died, and something that affected the family for always, as long as we have been.
How did you feel when you became a mom, and what would you like your grandkids to know about Kimmy and Kim?
Well, I guess like most mothers, I was thrilled to death when I found out I was pregnant. We had been married 4 years when Cammie came along. And it was good that we waited 4 years. We were ready for a baby at that time. We were just ecstatic. I think I've told both of you girls this before, that I really enjoyed pregnancy and being pregnant and waiting for y'all to come. When Kim came along, we had been trying to have a second child for about 2 years, and wanted y'all to be closer together than you were, and had even started adoption procedures, and were at the point where they were getting ready to come and do a home visit when I found out that Kim was on the way. So both times it was just, we were just filled with excitement and joy and happiness. Cammie, when she came along, was this little dainty little, she was always girly and dancing around and twirling around a lot like Ronnie does. And I don't know how much of that was because we prompted that, because of course we gave her dolls and girl things, and in those days, it's before the women's movement and all of that, so that's what you did with little girls, was you gave them girl toys to play with, and you kind of promoted that. So she played dishes and always had a doll in her hand constantly. I could tell she was going to be a good mom, because she always walked around with dolls all the time, playing with dolls and hugging dolls and loving on dolls. When Kim came along, she really was born a little tomboy, I think, because she gravitated to balls and playing outdoors. Cammie took now ballet and liked music and liked dancing around and things like that, and Kim was always playing with balls and boys and outdoor kinds of things. She wanted to climb the trees and dig in the dirt and, ooh, is that a worm? Those kinds of things. So they were real different. But then again, I don't know whether we as parents promoted that or not, because since we didn't have a boy, I don't know whether Dad tended to do more boy-type things with her, or whether that was just her personality. But I think it was a major part of her personality. Cammie liked music from the start, and I did a lot of singing and taught kindergarten when she was young. When she was in kindergarten, we did a lot of music activities at that time, and she developed an interest in music, I think, real early. Kind of a natural thing that she had inborn in her. And Kim was the kind of kid that was a real social human being. That she wanted people around her all the time, and kids around her all the time. And she didn't want to sit still for piano and music and stories. She wanted to be visiting and playing and, interacting with people, while Cammie was the more quiet, introspective reader and music-oriented person. Now, what was the rest of that question?
Well, what did you like most about being a mom?
I think being a mother is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a hard thing to be a mother, because I think you're learning so much while you're being a mother, and I learned a lot at Cammie's expense about how to be a mother. I think I was a better mother when Kim came along, because I learned a lot. I think with your first child, you're just so strict and you want them to do everything right and to be perfect and to know everything and to be smart, and so you're just working real hard at that. And when the second child comes along, you're a lot more relaxed. I lost my thought on the question.
What did you enjoy most about being a mom?
I enjoyed everything about being a mother. I really enjoyed the young years, when y'all were little bitty. And probably a lot of that is because of my pediatric training, because when I was in pediatrics, I mostly worked with 5 and under children and babies, a lot of babies. And so I liked that preschool age, and the time, when you're kind of a child again, playing games and things with them again. I basically liked everything about being a mother. If I were doing it again, there are a lot of things I would do different. I would spend a lot more time in the kitchen doing kitchen things, but then I spent as much time as I had, because I still had to work. There are things that I had to do that took my time away from just being a mother. I couldn't be a full-time mother. If I were doing it now, I would want to be a full-time mother and spend more time taking the kids to places and doing things with them. And I think that's what being a grandmother gives us an opportunity to do, to be a grandmother. So when you're a grandparent and you've seen the things that you might not have had time to do or couldn't do because you were so busy providing for the kid and being a parent. So the grandparents come along, and the opportunities you have as a grandparent are to give to those children, those grandchildren, the things that you might not have given your own children, the time and the exposure to arts and music and theater and travel, and to give them those opportunities to do the things that the parents just can't do financially or don't have the time to do. That's what I see us as grandparents doing for our grandkids.
What was it like becoming a grandmother?
Well, becoming a grandmother was just this incredible feeling of a continuation of your life. It was like that when I became a mother, but your life experience and knowing that your life is limited, that you're not going to live forever, and that here comes this little person who's going to carry on, that is a part of you, part of your child, that has a little bit of you and this person too, who is going to carry on life and be a continuation of you. It's really exciting. When I became a mother, when I had Cammie, I was awake, which was unusual at that time, awake for the birth. And man, it was an incredible experience to have this little child, this little baby come out of you and hold this baby that you've, given life to. And it's a fabulous experience for both of us. But then when Jeremy was born, it was just, it's like taking that experience and adding on, a new dimension to it. It's really wonderful. And I have really enjoyed being a mama. One thing that I love is to have the kids with me with nobody else around except Granddad. Just to take them away from the parents and let them do and be their little selves, and just let them play and play with them. And we love having them in bed with us and telling them stories about when we were little and when you all were little. And just having that time with no other adults around is really, really fun and really neat. Because they share the funniest things, They don't tell family secrets or anything like that. It's just that, they're so free, because we were so strict with y'all and we had such restrictions, on what you could do and what you couldn't do. And don't do that, And when the grandkids come along, it's like they can do anything they want to do at Mamie's house. And pretty much it's okay. We have to calm them down every now and then because they're getting too loud or too boisterous or, something like that. But it's pretty much, they wake up and we say, want to go get pancakes or, you want peanut butter for breakfast, And we do whatever they want to do. And we're slow. We're slower than we were as parents. We move slower. And so we move more in sync with the grandkids. And we don't have to be in a, hurry up, it's time to go to school, or it's time, we got to get dressed, and, we only have 5 minutes, and, we don't do that at our house because we don't have to do that. And I especially love taking them on trips and having that. I really regret that we didn't go camping with you all. We didn't have the money to do that or the means to even rent a camper or even buy a sleeping bag, to go camping. And besides, I thought I couldn't sleep outside at that time. And
Well, when you go camping now, you're not sleeping
that's
outside.
true. We use a trailer, but I think I could sleep in a tent. I think I could. But when we go in the trailer, we just have so much fun because it's such a tiny little trailer, and everybody's just so cozy, And it's almost like everybody's literally sitting on top of each other. It's such a tiny little trailer, but we have such a grand time. And we tell about, the last trip we took with Jeremy and what happened and, where we might go next. And we stop at every little thing. I mean, if there's a cow on the road, if there's a cow crossing the road or whatever we see, it's not like we got to hurry up and go on down the road. We just stop, and we look at the flock of birds or whatever it is. And so we give them, in that way, we give them a lot different experience than you could ever give them because of your time limitations that you have as parents, and as every parent has. So I think that's the gift, one of the gifts that grandparents, I think a big gift that grandparents can give grandchildren that I hope that we're doing is a history of who they are and where they come from in terms of their ancestors and their heritage, so that they have an understanding and a pride of who they are and a responsibility. You know, the flip side is that they have a responsibility to live up to that, what their great-grandparents or others in the past have gone through and stand for. You know, it's a gift with responsibility. So we talk a lot about our grandparents to them, you know, what we remember about our grandparents and our experiences with our own families, you know, growing up. I think I really learned how to be a grandma a lot from Mama Irene, but also from my grandmother Deal and from Granny Poobie. Didn't get to see that Granny Poobie very often, probably about once a year. I think it seems like growing up that we went to North Carolina about once a year, and they only came to Texas because they'd never been out of the county. They came to Texas only once or twice while I was in the entire time I was growing up. But my grandmother Deal was a little bitty woman. She was about 4'10", very short little woman. And both of my grandmothers fit the classic image of grandmothers. They were round and jolly little women. And Grandmother Deal, we had to walk past her house every day to go to school, and then walk past her house again to come home. So usually on the way home from school, Jerry and Bill would pass by somebody's house, and they'd be, before you know it, they would be playing baseball, you know, with each other in the street. They just started, you know, gathering in the street, and they're throwing balls back and forth. So I would go on around the corner, and Grandmother Deal was always waiting for us on the front porch. And those days, the women in our, all the people in their age group grew up sitting on the front porch all the time, because you didn't have heating and air conditioning. You had a potbelly stove if you lived in the country. And so the people just gathered on the front porch, and they used to call it watching the world go by. What are you doing? Oh, I'm just sitting here watching the world go by. So every afternoon she would be on the front porch waiting for the kids to, you know, get out of school. So a lot of times it would be just me, or if Joanne was living in town at that time, it might be the two of us walking home from school. And we'd get to her house, and she'd be sitting on the front porch. She had one of those rockers.
Gliders.
Gliders. She had a glider on the front porch. She'd just be swinging. And a lot of times we could hear her because she whistled. She was a real whistler in North Carolina and in the hill countries. A lot of the women especially whistled a lot. So she'd just be sitting on the front porch whistling a tune. It just, anything, any tune would pop into her head, you know, and she whistled. And we'd get to her house, and she'd always have cookies and milk. So we would stop in for cookies and milk. She was, she had a sweet personality, but she was very blunt. She would say anything that popped into her mind, and it didn't matter what it was. She would just, if she wanted to ask you a question about anything, she'd ask it. And so, you know, we would go over and spend the night at her house quite a bit. And one of the things that she always did for us was, she'd say, now, don't you tell your mom and dad about this. It's just our little secret. And for breakfast, she would fix us cocoa, hot chocolate, but made out of cocoa, or real chocolate, with about half a cup of sugar in it, in each cup. And toast with butter covering the toast, and then we'd dunk it dunk it in the hot chocolate, and that was breakfast. And dunking was not permissible at our house because that was not good manners to dunk. So with all these kids, she had 13 grandchildren. And she had one more that was born a lot later after I was a grown woman, so 14 altogether, but she had 13. And probably at one time there was only about 5 of us there to spend the night at one time, 5 or maybe 6 at a time. But she had like 3 bedrooms. She had a really nice little house, one of those craftsman style houses. And we'd just all be piled in beds, all over the place. And just sit around that table in the morning, and there'd be cocoa all over the table where we'd eaten our cocoa. Sometimes she would even put sugar and make sugar toast. That's where I got the making sugar toast stuff for my childhood. Then Granny Pootie's house was just wonderful. It was my favorite place in the whole wide world to go. Because Granny Pootie lived on a farm. She milked a cow every morning at the break of dawn. Every morning she would be up. And the first thing we would do is feed the chickens on the way to the barn to milk a cow. Go and feed the chickens. And so I got to feed the chickens with her and slop the pigs. She had a slop bucket and all the table scraps and all the used milk that people didn't drink or whatever was left over went into the slop bucket. And she put a lid on it, but it sat in the kitchen by the wood stove. I just thought her house was so neat. She had a telephone in the hallway. When I was a little girl, and you went to the telephone and you cranked it up and you listened, and the operator would come on the line. May I help you? Oh, this is Carolyn. What are you doing here, Carolyn? Well, how are you? Well, just a minute, so-and-so's on the line. And you could hear the other person on the line, The other person would come on the line, they'd talk. Oh, is that Carolyn? What are you doing? Here, when'd you get here? Well, I didn't read in the paper that you were coming. That kind of thing. And I guess she gave me, Granny Pootie must have given me the love for the garden and digging in the dirt and working outside, because she didn't have a flower garden. She only had a few flowers, but she had a vegetable garden. And she had a berry patch. And we would go pick berries and dig like potatoes up out of the garden, and everywhere she went, I would follow her all day long. Out in the garden, working in the garden. We'd work in the garden, and she'd always make me wear a hat so it wouldn't hurt my complexion. But she was just this jolly lady that was always laughing, and she told stories constantly. She was a storyteller. And she was really a hill lady. She chewed tobacco. And sometimes the tobacco would drip down her mouth. And I'd look at her and I'd say, Granny Pootie, why do you chew that nasty tobacco? Tobacco, that's what she called it. Why do you chew that nasty tobacco? She'd say, Lord, child, because I started it young, and don't you dare even think about it. It's nasty. But it tastes good. So I just thought she was so different. She was so unique and so different from a city girl experience, that I just dearly loved going there. Frequently when we went, Jerry and Bill and I would spend the night at Granny Pootie's house. But they would be so boisterous, and they'd get into fights, and so she'd have to call Mom and Daddy and tell them to come get them. And they would all go back down the booth and spend the night. And so I'd be the only one there, because Jeannie would be too young. And so I had a lot of happy times and good memories with her.
Why'd you go into nursing?
Beats me, Claude. No. You know, I've wondered about that question myself, but when I was in high school and we were going through all the testing that you do in high school to see areas of interest, the thing that kept popping up every time I took any of those tests was in the service fields. And at those times, for women were really limited when I was growing up, when I was thinking about college and what I wanted to do. There were 3 things that you could do. You could get married and let your husband work and provide for you, and you'd be a stay-at-home mom. You could be a teacher, or you could be a nurse. The nurse was considered the less desirable of all 3, because you had to empty bedpans, and you had to bathe people, and you had to care for people's bodies. And so if you were going to be a respectable young woman, nursing wasn't the thing that most parents wanted their daughter to do, because they would see too much. And so, but every time I took those tests, the service fields kept coming up. And when the counselors would talk to me about the test, they would say, well, have you ever thought about nursing? And I'd say, well, a little bit, and Nancy Drew, the books about Nancy Drew and the nursing and all that, I read all those books. And I was probably made better grades in the literary areas than I did in the science areas. I was better at school in the literary areas, but when my father died then, when I was 14, that really made me take a look at nursing, because I was so devastated that he died, and that I didn't know what to do to help. And I think that I really went into nursing kind of as a way to appease, that feeling of helplessness that I had at his death. And then there was a man in our church that was an attorney that had helped my mother with some decisions and things after Daddy's death. And when Mama told him that I was sort of thinking about nursing, he said, "Oh, I know a good nursing school, a Baptist nursing school." And I had been active in the Baptist church since I was born. I was in the cradle roll, enrolled in cradle roll from birth on. And so a Baptist school kind of appealed to me, because I'd been so involved in church and everything. And he said, it's at Hardin-Simmons University, and it's Hendrick Hospital, and she might even be able to get, a scholarship, some funding for it. And so that's where I went. It was like, it all just sort of fell in place.
What are your hopes and dreams for the future?
Well, I think society is going to have some hard days in the future. I think as my generation gets older, it's going to cause a lot of pressures and problems for the healthcare field. I don't think there are going to be nearly enough people to care for the number of aging people that we're going to have around us. I see things being pretty difficult. At the same time, I have a lot of hope and faith in your generation and in your children's generation to come up with some, creative solutions that will help the problems of overpopulation and large numbers of people reaching 100 and maybe even 110 years of age while their funds run out, and that kind of thing. I hope that we're moving to a more equitable society where all different kinds of people from all different kinds of ethnic backgrounds and economic backgrounds can live together in peace and harmony. I hope we're moving toward a society where there's less war and strife. Although, there's a part of me that still has a fear of, that perhaps there'll be more violence in the world than we even have right now. But I have hopes that it won't be that way, that it'll be the other way. For our grandchildren, for Jeremy and Ronnie and Clay, I have a strong hope that each of you will have a loving family to care for, to love, and to take care of, and to be a part of. But if you choose not to have a family, if you choose some alternate lifestyle, then that is okay with me too. Because I think that you can still build a family, even if it's a different kind of family from what our traditional family has been like. Because things change ever so gradually over the years that you never know exactly what things might look like in the future. I want each of you to be a contributing part of society and to do something for other people. I think the only way that you can really be happy and to really grow as a person is to finally learn how to give to other people. And I think I'm slow coming to that. I've been slow coming to that, I think. Slower than probably Jerry has been. He's given a lot more back to society and other people than I have. And I think I'm just at the point, and maybe that's because I was busy being a mother and, going to school and doing other things. But I hope that each one of you will be that kind of person that you can serve other people besides yourself and even your own family, that you'll give to the greater society. And I have every confidence that you'll do that. And I think I see you already doing that. And I think your parents are doing a better job of teaching you how to do that than maybe we did with you two girls. I think, though, that we all have some difficult days ahead of us to face. And hopefully, people will pull together even more than they have in the past. So that one thing that I don't want to happen is that there be such a huge gap between those who have and those who don't have. Because then I think there's so many problems that can develop. I hope that there's more equity among all different kinds of people. And that those who have will share with those who don't have as much.